we
I
see
can,
that
I'm sorry, I can take
think
it
we
off
can do it.
live. I thought you were ready to go. If you'd like me to take it off live, I can.
Okay, I think we're ready.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're ready. Okay, and it's streaming. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathleen Dumais, the vice chair of the committee. The chairman will probably be back to join us in a little while, but in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get started. We are going to take the bills this afternoon in the following order: House Bill 1044, House Bill 957, House Bill 958, and House Bill 968. We'll then go to House Bill 876, and then the final bill will be House Bill 375. Is Delegate Weibel here for the Washington County delegation? I'm sorry, Delegate McKay, you're here?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Okay. If you would like to go ahead, and if you're not muted, if you could mute, if you're not scheduled speaking at the moment, that would be helpful.
Right.
The other thing I wanted just to remind everybody, generally speaking, the chat is for communications between the committee members. It is not a vehicle where you can use it to sort of continue to argue your case or provide additional information. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And Delegate McKay, we will hear from you.
Well, thank you very much, Vice Chair. Thank you for committee for allowing me to present this Washington County Delegation Bill HB 1044. I am presenting this as a courtesy. This is a Washington County Business License Zoning Certificate requirement. It does have the purpose of prohibiting the clerk of county circuit court for Washington County from issuing certain business licenses under certain circumstance unless the applicant submits a certain zoning certificate, and prohibiting the clerk of the court of Washington County for endorsing a change of a place of a business in Washington County where there are certain zoning requirements are met. Now, this is all relating to businesses in Washington County. I do believe that there has been presented to the committee a support letter from President Jeff Klein from Washington County, but also an opposition letter from two of the commissioners. It was a 3-2 vote for the Board of Commissioners to present this. I'm presenting it as a courtesy and will gladly answer any kind of questions that you may have.
Okay. Are there any questions for Delegate McKay? Seeing none, the only question, I'm sorry, Delegate Howard. And you're muted, Delegate Howard.
Sorry, Diane. What was the vote in delegation?
In delegation,
Yeah.
Unanimous to support. And that was because the Board of Commissioners was a 3-2 vote, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? And Delegate McKay, I don't have the committee file. Has the delegation letter been submitted?
I don't have a copy of it, but I will concur that we know that you'd like to have that. So we'll make sure that you will get it. I just don't want to speak out of turn, but I'll make sure it does get there.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
All right. Any other questions? No, seeing none, that concludes the hearing on House Bill 1044. Thank you, Delegate McKay. And we will now move on to Delegate Conaway. Delegate Conaway here. Okay. I do think he told us he needed to be in judiciary for something at the beginning. And he has the next three bills. Is there someone here to talk about House Bill 876, which is the Uninsured Employers Fund?
Yes, Madam Vice Chair. My name is Michael Burns. I'm the director of the Uninsured Employers Fund, and I am prepared to proceed when you are.
Okay, well then we will start the hearing for House Bill 876.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Burns.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Committee members, good afternoon. My name is Michael Burns, and I am the director of the Maryland Uninsured Employers Fund. We take care of injured workers and their families when their employers refuse to do it. House Bill 876 will extend for 1 year, a temporary change in the assessment amounts received by both the Uninsured Employers Fund and the Subsequent Injury Fund that was authorized by the legislature last year. I'm sorry. by the legislature last year in Senate Bill 8. The UEF and the SIF both receive an assessment on awards and settlements of the Workers' Compensation Commission. Prior to last year, the SIF received a 6.5% assessment. The UEF received a 2% assessment. Senate Bill 8 changed that. Those percentages were changed for a period of 1 year so that the subsequent injury fund would receive 5.5% and the UEF 3%. This change was authorized to provide financial support to the uninsured employers fund and information regarding the long-term need for possibly increasing the assessment. Your action in 2020 was good policy and made much sense and was much appreciated. And then along came COVID and everything, everywhere, for everybody changed. The COVID pandemic, the shutdowns, the disruption has hit the fund hard. As our written testimony illustrates, instead of an increase in assessment revenue this year, the UEF has actually seen a decrease of $1.1 million in assessments. That result has been disastrous for the fund, and it cannot go on. House Bill 876 will counter that financial hit on the fund by providing one additional year of the 1% assessment increase you supported last year. These numbers don't lie. If House Bill 876 does not pass, the UEF's fund balance will decrease in a trend that will end in probable insolvency in the years to come. I ask you to please support House Bill 876. Give us the tools so that we can do the job and stay fully funded. And by doing so, keep protecting the injured workers and their families who we support. I thank you very much for your time and your consideration. And I especially want to thank Chairman Davis for sponsoring this legislation. And I am here for any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Madam Vice Chair.
I hate computers, in case anyone didn't know, but Delegate Valderrama.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Welcome, Mr. Burns. Nice to see you again. Happy New Year.
Nice to see you, Delegate.
As you know, we, as Senator Klausmeyer and I, we chair the House and Senate Joint Workers' Comp Uninsurance Benefits Committee. And at our last meeting, which has been some time now, especially due to the pandemic, there was a sunset on this bill. And I understand everyone's going through, the pandemic, suffering, revenues down, totally understand. I just ensure that this won't be a time and time again every year that we're going to be extending the sunset. And correct me if I'm wrong, all this legislation does is extend that sunset. And if I missed something, please advise.
Yes, ma'am.
So-
Well, I've told Ed Dodd of the SIF, I've told the administration that this is a 1 year, one-time piece of legislation. I have no desire to be here to do this. I was very grateful for what you all did last year. And frankly, had the world not collapsed, I think it would have turned out exactly as we expected. But the world has collapsed and the facts are what the facts are. And since we're 100% self-funded, we don't receive any general funding. The assessment provides 80% of our revenue. And if the assessment is down in a time when we have an increase in the assessment, it's clear that something has got to give somewhere. So I went to the administration, I asked for their support, they gave it to me. And now I'm asking you for a one-time fix, but I have no intention of coming back and asking for this again.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Stay safe.
Any other
You too.
questions for Mr. Burns? Okay, seeing none. Is Mr. Edgar Dodd here?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay.
The subsequent injury fund does support this 1 year extension of the sunset provision. We recognize the importance of both agencies in serving injured Maryland workers. And although this is what's happening to us is we're losing $3.6 million a year with this 1% reduction, we do have sufficient funds to meet our obligations. And we, as I said, we support the extension for 1 year, and the sun will definitely set on this reduction on June 30th, 2022.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Dodd? Okay, Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. We have one person testifying in opposition, Pilar Clemens.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Dumais. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Dumais and committee members. My name is Pilar Clemens. I'm the Director of Government Relations at Chesapeake Employers Insurance Company. As we've already heard today, House Bill 876 extends the alteration of the workers' compensation award assessments to give the UEF additional funds to avoid insolvency. Chesapeake has paid the assessments as ordered under Senate Bill 8 from 2020 and will obviously continue to do so and do anything, any laws that are passed. However, we share the concerns of the committee and what Delegate Valderrama has said, specifically that the additional funds contemplated under this extension may not solve the UEF's solvency problems. This issue has been before the committee at least last year, and for several years the issue has been going on, and there still doesn't seem to be a long-term solution, nor is there any improvement of the financial stability of the UEF. They still have significant administrative operating costs, and the additional funds may serve only as a Band-Aid. The UEF's outsourcing of fundamental operational functions appears to continue to create a significant disparity in their budget. These functions are something that the other funds, IWIF and the SIF, are able to handle internally without the outsourced cost. All three agencies were created at different times for different purposes, but the SIF and IWIF are able to handle those functions internally. Chesapeake's position today is merely to inquire about the long-term plan for the UEF solvency, which would ensure stability in Maryland's workers' compensation system. Chesapeake stands willing to cooperate and work with this committee in any capacity necessary to find a long-term solution for this problem. Thank you so much, and I'll take any questions. Just in time, too.
There you go. Thank you, Ms. Clemens. Delegate Impalaria has a question.
Yeah, I have a question for Ms. Clemens. You said that they're outsourcing. Could you give us some examples instead of just saying they're outsourcing? Could you tell us some of the things that you feel that they shouldn't be outsourcing, that they should be doing in-house, and how they could save money and make more money that way?
Sure. So I think that the audit and the fiscal report from last year showed that the UEF has a contract with Corvell where they outsource a lot of their fundamental functions, their claims management and servicing. That would be the big one. I mean, that contract's in the millions per year.
And how many additional employees do you think they would have to hire if they did that in-house?
You know, I would be out on a limb to guesstimate how they could, you know, how many employees they would need to address their claims function in-house. But I can tell you that, you know, IWIF's been doing it since 1914. The SIF has been doing it internally. So, I mean, it is something that can be done internally without that outsourced cost. But I don't have an exact number of employees for you.
Okay, well, if you have any others that you'd like to share with me later on, I would love to know what they are. And I'm sure the agency would love to know what they are. So thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Clemens? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. And that concludes the testimony on House Bill 876. Is Delegate Conway here?
Yes, Vice Chair, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Committee. I'm Delegate Conway here to introduce three bills that all three deal with the conversion of interest into fees in pawnbroker business. HB 0957, HB 0958, and HB 0968. I have a copy of a pawnbroker ticket, but I didn't send it to you. I was in contact with Mr. Steve Sakamoto Wingle about a situation that was presented to me, that some of the pawnbrokers, and I don't want to say some because I found a few examples in my limited research, but some of the pawnbrokers, what they're doing is, well, a lot of them are charging 200% anyway, but we'll just use an example of $100. If you go on with a ring or a watch and you borrow $100, let's say they might charge you 10%. So you have to pay back $110. That's in 30 days or a calendar month. At the second day of the next calendar month, you get another charge of an additional $10. So to get your property back, you have the first 100, the first 10, and now an additional 10. But what we found out in doing a little research is that some of the pawnbrokers at the end of the 40th day are converting their interest payment into a fee. So therefore you would have the 10, you had 100 principal, the $10 for the first 30 days, the $10 for the day after the first 30 days, and then another $10 that's converted into a fee. Now, depending upon what you pawn, your fee rate is going to be different. So if you pawn something that's say $1,000 and you have to pay $100 interest, then your fee is going to be that. What my 3 bills say, one bill is to forbid the interest from being changed into a fee. And I understand this is a time of pandemic and the pawn shops are trying to be your friend, even though they're charging you 200%. So if that's not sufficient, then I say that they should limit their interest rate where they turn interest into the fee to 10%. And on the third bill, I said that they shouldn't collect any additional fees and leave it as it is. And I would leave that up to the committee. I mean, I'm glad to answer any questions, but right now people are getting gouged, waiting on stimulus checks, and they're converting it to fees. And like I said, I did talk to the Consumer Relations Regulatory Board, and they wanted more information, but I wanted to talk to you first before I send them some more information, because I would have to redact it and take names off and all like that. And I didn't want to overly paint the whole industry with the same brush. And with that, I'll be glad to take any questions.
Okay. And that was your testimony on all 3 bills, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Delegate Conaway? All right.
Madam Vice Chair, I don't know if you could see me as Delegate Pippi.
Okay, please go right ahead. I don't see.
Okay, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Delegate Conaway, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Buddy from Judiciary. So a couple questions. One, and I'm not overly intimately experienced in all aspects of a pawn shop, but a lot of these pawn shops are going out of business now. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of that because they're doing a lot of work online, and while some people are losing, some people are making.
The other question, and I guess that was more of a statement, but this question would be, I mean, a lot of people, particularly in low-income areas, do they kind of rely on various services that a pawn shop could provide to get groceries and diapers and essential goods?
Yeah, if you don't have the money for the groceries and diapers, I mean, rather than let your child sit there and be crying, you're going to take something to the pawn shop until you get your next piece of check, until you get your next money. I mean, you're waiting on your stimulus check right now. You think it was signed yesterday. What are you going to do? You need heat in the house. You have to resort to these means. Dire straits.
And you may not know the answer to this, and I don't, and I'm going to ask it anyways. I mean, do you think something like this would be pretty detrimental to the pawn shop industry, and would ultimately lead to more pawn shops closing, and then subsequently lead to more of those services not being available, particularly in low-income areas? If we were to put, because look, if you look at the fiscal note, it just says impact to small business meaningful, which really just means problematic, in most cases.
Yeah. No,
it's on all 3 bills.
I don't think it would cause any problem, because the way the pawn shop normally has been doing business over the years is if you pawn something, you come back and get it within the 30 days. If not, they charge you 2 months worth of interest, and maybe 6 months out, 2 months out, 60 days, they go ahead and sell it. And right now, a lot of things are being sold by eBay online. So they're making money. They're making money. And you'd be surprised what comes out of what you call low income houses, because you'll have like grandmother's silverware or an old diamond ring or old watch or something, and something that's of value. I don't think it would be too much of an impact on their business.
Okay, well, good to see you again. Thanks, Delegate.
Thank you. And with that, I would hope that you can look.
Nope, I think there are a few more questions.
More questions? Oh, okay.
More questions. Delegate Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Welcome, Delegate Conway.
Thank you.
I just have to ask, because this sounds like something would most likely go to my subcommittee. And I must admit, I'm a little bit different view of pawn shops than Delegate Pippi is. So that's why I would like some clarification. I'm from the situation I've been in, where I've lived, I've never seen it as a benefit to the community. So he mentioned services that these things provide. Do you believe that our pawn shops do provide valued service to your community?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And I only say that because I have no problem regulating them. I think they're, most of the time I've dealt with them in the past, and they operate as I feel like they're loan sharks. The amount of money that they collect is almost unconscionable.
Well, yeah, that's true unless you've heard your baby crying at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because you can't afford any milk. So in that kind of cases, they definitely worth the.
Oh, I didn't say the opportunities weren't good. It was the interest. Okay. It seems dead.
Oh, well, interest is terrible.
There you go. And so that's why it's hard for me to look at them favorably. So
I'm looking at a document that says 240%.
Right, which again, that's what I said about being unconscionable. I didn't say their existence was problematic. I said the way that they treat their customers can be unconscionable. I just want to know, since these will be dropped most likely on my doorstep to my subcommittee, you're basically just trying to rein them in somewhat as far as how they collect their fee.
On this fee, the interest is okay because it's stated, but I haven't seen anything about the conversion of the interest into a fee. That's three different conversions of money. I don't see that.
I got you. I just want to make sure as we take this bill forward that we kind of do things that you're trying to get done with the bill. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, Delegate Brooks.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Delegate Conway, question. Once in order for them to, I know there's a usury law, you can't charge anybody more than 8% interest unless you got a contract, Now, if they're charging 10%, it seems like that they would have to have a contract, and that is what they call a loan disclosure agreement. If
I may, Delegate, what I'm looking at says an annual percentage rate of 240% on this particular document.
240%? 40%.
Yes, sir.
I thought Maryland had laws that would limit the amount of interest that one could be charged.
Well, that's going a little bit beyond the scope of my bill. I want to limit the conversion of the interest into the fee. I mean, if you agree to borrow $100 and pay back $120 or $130, that's your agreement. But if you don't know that in 40 days you're going to get hit with another fee of the interest amount, that's totally different.
Yeah. Okay. I understand what you're saying, and I agree with that. I just thought that there were laws on the books right now that would limit that. I think these people are being abused and may not know about it. I heard this guy once say, he said, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. So maybe they're being taken advantage of and not know what laws are already on the books to that.
Yes, I would leave that up to the wisdom of your committee.
Okay. All right. Thanks, sir. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions.
Well, thank you.
With
thank you very much.
Delegate Conaway, thank you very much for your testimony on these bills, and I'm sure we will shortly take them up.
All right. With that, I would ask for at least a consideration of favorable. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. And we will now move on to House Bill 375. Delegate Valderrama.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues of the Economic Matters House Committee. For the record, Chris Valderrama here presenting House Bill 375, the Time to Care Act Bill of 2021. Before I start with my testimony, I just want to preface once again to say to all the members of the committee, especially our new member, Delegate Hippie, you may or may not be familiar with this legislation, but I just want to ask members to keep an open mind. This is not the first time this bill has been introduced. And I want to say to all those on this Zoom, not just my colleagues on the committee, but to everyone who is here in support and opposition, we all have a job to do. And as lead sponsor of this bill, and not the first lead sponsor of this bill, I just want to start off by saying, I know there's been bills that have been brought forth to our committee and otherwise where, you know, the pandemic has caused such a strife and sacrifices have been made. But I just want to say that this piece of legislation was sorely needed prior to the pandemic, and if not more now. I just want to preface that by saying that. And to also say to those, especially those who are in opposition, I understand. I looked at the unfavorables, I looked at the testimony in your positions, and I wholeheartedly understand, especially small business, the hospitality industry, the restaurant association. I get it. So I just want to say that I'm presenting this not in opposition to your position. I can tell you personally, I have experienced this on a personal level. My husband is an employee of the hospitality industry, and he was furloughed before we even adjourned our truncated session last year. So it's only of recent in the last few months that we've been able to come around, and had this legislation or something like this legislation been in place, would have been wholeheartedly supported. And so with that, also, I want to say that one of my lead panelists, Ms. Regan Bond, who will be following my testimony before we take Q&A, I just want to point out for those who, the most inquisitive ones, but especially my dear colleague, the Business Reg Chair, that if you have any questions, anyone, I encourage questions because this bill has come forth several times and will continue to until it is passed. So with that said, again, keep an open mind. I am not, as this lead sponsor, not anti-business, want to try and work with all the proponents and opponents. And instead of saying this can't be done, I want everyone to think, how can we make it happen? So with that said, again, here to present House Bill 375, Time to Care Act bill. Again, not a bill to this committee. Task force was done in 2017, where legislation subsequently was introduced in 19, 20, and again this year. And in each of those years, the opposition had various reasons for opposing the bill because, as has been said in their position, the time wasn't right. But I just want to say that the essence of this bill is that for a relatively small amount of money, employers, employees, and some self-employed individuals can obtain insurance that will provide a partial wage replacement. Let me just emphasize partial wage for Marylanders who need time away from the workplace because of their own serious illness, birth or adoption of a child, or to care for a close relative who has a serious illness. The benefit would range from $100 to $1,000 per week, depending on the wage being replaced and the weekly deduction for the program. Last year, when I introduced this legislation to you, I had asked all of you to take a mental inventory of all the people you know, family, friends, constituents, civic organization members, church members, our own political colleagues, and ask yourself whether you knew anyone who could use the benefits that would be offered by this bill. And I told you that all of us, regardless of our walk in life, we will face adverse and unexpected circumstances that could be and might be addressed by this legislation. But little did I know, much less little did we as a legislature know, that a few short weeks following my testimony, that Maryland, the nation, the world would be upended by the COVID-19 global epidemic. No one saw that coming. And millions faced job loss or reduction in hours. Some of us were more fortunate and kept our jobs and paychecks, but even among those who continue to work, the burden of COVID-19 has not been shared equally. And I know we've heard that many testimony and many of the hearings that we've had thus far, that many of us are able to work from home using Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, what other technology there is out there. And many of us have adequate vacation or sick leave, which we can use if we become ill or have to quarantine because we were exposed to someone who had COVID-19. Yet our frontline workers, those provide vital services like hospital workers, grocery clerks, maintenance, custodial staff, and daycare providers, they are unequally exposed to COVID-19. And so many, if not most of these workers are people of color, both Black and brown. And an unfair share of these frontline workers have become quite ill, and sadly, many have passed. So these same workers are also among the lowest paid workers in our economy and the least likely to have adequate sick or vacation leave benefits to fall back on. And so for them, a case of COVID or exposure to a person with COVID presents an untenable choice, whether to show up to work so you have money for food, your mortgage, your rent, and other bills, or to quarantine to take care of yourself or of your loved ones or the community at large. So I mentioned even before COVID-19, statistics on sick leave and family medical leave, they were bleak and unequal. And in fact, the US is the only advanced industrialized nation without a federal law providing workers access to maternity leave, and one of only a handful of nations that doesn't offer broader family and medical leave insurance. Now, many of you are familiar with the Family and Medical Leave Act that was passed back in 1993, and it was groundbreaking indeed. It was heralded as a great advance for employees of all pay grades because it guaranteed workers up to 12 weeks of job protection, protected to leave to recover from a serious illness, care for a newborn, and so on. But the rub here is that something that is quite often misunderstood is that this leave is unpaid. And unless you have adequate means or adequate benefits, it is very unlikely that you can take this type of leave. So what does House Bill 375 do? It establishes a family medical insurance plan similar to our UI insurance plan. It's not the same as paid sick leave because it's not a job benefit solely provided by an employer. It is an insurance plan that provides a partial wage replacement for up to 12 weeks with proper documentation by a medical professional. It is a self-funded plan. There are no state funds involved. The startup and ongoing administrative costs are borne entirely by the program. Contributions will be collected starting in January of 2022. Excuse me. But the plan will not begin paying benefits until a year and a half, 18 months after that date, so that the fund remains actuarially sound. The contributions and benefits are paid and received on a sliding scale. So the most any employee or employer will pay is $920, and that rate is for an employee making $137,700 a year or over. So $137,700 or over. Those making the average Maryland wage will be charged $362 a week, as will their employer. The minimum wage employee would pay $157 per week, increasing to $2.01 when the minimum wage reaches $15. And again, these are not hourly payments nor daily charges, they're weekly contributions. And I want to note well here that what makes this plan affordable, and before anyone gets, uptight about what I'm about to say, again, I preface by saying not anti-business. What makes this plan affordable for an employer is that they do not have to pay wages while an employee is using these benefits. They could use the dollars saved by that employee's absence to hire a temporary replacement or pay other employees for added hours to make up for the employee's absence, or they can do neither. That's the employer's choice. To be clear, some people may never use this insurance, but that's just the nature and the fact of an insurance policy, as we all know. Some people don't need it or don't want it. Some already have more generous benefits, and some cannot afford to use this policy even with the benefits offered because they can't live on a partial wage replacement. So with that, a few final points is that I want to mention that this insurance is tremendously popular among citizens in our great state. In a polling that was performed to assess public opinion of a paid family medical leave insurance program by OpinionWorks, performed a statewide poll of 1,011 registered voters, both online and by phone, between during Christmas, December 11 to 26 of last year. And the poll has a potential sampling error of plus or minus 3.1%. And with that, almost 8 in 10 voters support this proposal when they hear the details, to include the cost of the program. They are in support. This strong support crosses partisan and geographic lines, never dropping below 75% in any of the state's regions. So there is also evidence in the poll that the pandemic may be creating a higher level of urgency and support for this legislation, as families, and particularly women, have to take leave from work to deal with difficult challenges related to the pandemic. Most of those polled, I have to say, did not view the costs of this program as a tax. 2/3 of those polled viewed the costs associated with this program as either about what they would expect or even less than what they would expect. And so finally, 4 times as many voters said they are, if for any of my colleagues here on the committee that are worried if they take a positive stance on this legislation, 4 times as many voters said they are more likely to vote for a legislator who supports this legislation than said they were less likely to vote for one who supported this legislation. So we all know that these are difficult times, more than difficult times for the citizens of Maryland and for many of us here on the committee. I just shared my personal experience. We have all had to make sacrifices that were unimaginable a year ago. So there are some who will testify today who will, and with respect, who will undoubtedly say the time is not right to implement this program. It's too expensive, it will be said. And neither employer or employee can afford 1 more cent out of their payroll or paycheck. Yet, again, with respect, those same people have said that same tired line for the last 4 years, well before the pandemic shook our world, well before. So I respectfully ask that you instead, if this is not the time to implement the Time to Care Act bill, an affordable program which allows all Marylanders to care for themselves, their loved ones, and the community at large, please tell me, when is the right time? That I would like to know. So with that, colleagues, I urge you to pass a fair report for House Bill 375, Time to Care Act legislation, because the people of our great state cannot afford to wait any longer. And with that, Madam Vice Chair, I end my testimony. And I would strongly encourage that we have Ms. Regan Vaughn follow my testimony, because she is the most advanced expert with all the questions that can be answered. So your choice.
Okay. All right, well, maybe we'll take her and then we'll do questions. There are several questions up, but Ms. Vaughn?
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Regan Vaughn. I'm the Director of Advocacy for Catholic Charities of Baltimore. Catholic Charities provides care and services to Marylanders in need through over 80 programs at more than 300 sites in Central and Western Maryland. And I'm here today to ask for your support for HB 375, the Time to Care Act. As Delegate Valderrama explained, the bill does 2 main things. 1, it creates a state insurance pool to provide partial wage replacement for workers who need to take leave to care for themselves or a loved one. And 2, it provides job protection for that leave. The Time to Care Act is important to Catholic Charities because it really does touch every aspect of what we do. Pre-pandemic, I drove up to our Head Start program in Westminster, and before I could even raise the issue with our teachers, they brought up paid family leave as an issue of importance to them. When I visit with our seniors in our senior housing communities in Reisterstown and Fullerton, I hear about their neighbors who were forced to leave independent living for a nursing home because their family members couldn't take the time to care for them during a bout of illness or an injury. Sarah's House in Anne Arundel County has been working with families experiencing homelessness who lost their housing when they've had to go out on unpaid leave. And at our residential treatment center for children, St. Vincent's Villa, we hear about parents who have been struggling to help their children while worrying about losing their job. There are a wide range of advocates coming after me from a number of different sectors to talk about how this bill also affects their particular area. And we are united in our call for all Maryland workers to be able to access the partial wage replacement. It's good for our workers, it's good for our children, and if it's good for Maryland. This bill, we've tried hard to provide adequate coverage while also providing protection for workers. And we've tried to make adjustments to the bill over the past 3 years based on feedback we've received from the committee. I see I've run out of time, so I'm happy to answer any questions about those changes we've made or any other technical questions you may have on the bill. And I would ask that we eventually move to a favorable report on HB 375. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. We'll take questions now from Ms. Vaughn and Delegate Valderrama. Delegate Wilson was first.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Oh boy, somebody's got to turn their sound down. I guess let's just start out with a question to, I guess, from Catholic Charities. An employer paying the minimum wage, we'll say, no, let's just do employer who pays a $15 an hour wage. How much would this cost that employer per week?
So our modeling says that it would be about 0.67% of payroll. So at $15 an hour, the employer contribution would be $2.01 a week, and the employee contribution would be the same.
Okay, because my bigger question really goes around, number one, I'll be honest, anytime anybody mentions polling after this last election, just know a lot of people will be discounting that, because I'm surprised anybody would ever mention anything about polling again after we've seen such misadventures in our polling in our national level as far as elections, things of that nature. So I'm definitely not there for that. The whole, the voters, it's not really my concern to get reelected. It's to make sure we protect the state and its businesses. So I'm also not really concerned with that level of polling. The thing I'm concerned is, if this is such a great deal and such a great need with what's going on right now in our business community, why not just at least start with your self-employed program for everyone? Allow people to do this voluntarily on their own, as I, who own my business, would have to do. Why would you just, if this is in such need, why now's the time, let individuals and let these people who agree with this bill buy into that themselves instead of forcing the employers to buy in with them? Chris?
Ms. Vaughn, before you answer, I'll try to answer two of his questions or comments. One, I mentioned the polling because I've actually had colleagues approach me saying, I kind of like this, but my constituency, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I mentioned it. It wasn't so much for you per se.
I just don't trust polling.
And the second, as far as the self-employed, the only way I can answer that is that there are many advocates that will be following Ms. Vaughn and myself who are business owners, who do put their 50-50 share, who want to support bills like this. I understand your question, but I don't think I'll have an answer for you that will satisfy a response. Only to say is that the whole premise is to be 50-50. And I started off by saying that business owners, I totally understand that. Now, as far as the advocates and those who follow, I mean, as I always said, I'm open to negotiation. However, that would be a deal breaker, right? Because the whole premise of this bill is to be 50-50. And again, I don't know if that satisfies your answer, but there are business owners that will follow, that do the program the way the legislation is intended to do.
And why I say that is literally, I highly regret the fact that these things that our committee meetings are now online, because my wife is blowing my phone up because she is a business owner in full panic mode because we barely been able to keep alive. And her point was exactly what I brought to, but if it's so important, why would it be a deal breaker to say, hey, everybody contribute to your own program? Because you're telling individuals that are self-employed, there's no 50-50 because there's nobody to split it with. So they have to do it. Why would you not just allow everyone to do the self-employed version, which is you pay 100% of, I guess it'd be $4 a week, if that's if that's what the number was at $2.1, Why not just have everybody pay $4 a week? They can do it voluntary. They'll have this cushion under them if they so choose.
I think part of the problem, Delegate, is the cost goes up if we don't have full participation. We need a full pool to keep costs down. It's similar to when we passed the Affordable Care Act with health insurance, that unless everyone is participating in the model, then the ability to get costs down as low as it is just isn't there. And then organizations who want this get priced out.
Well, then why not mandate it? Why not just say all employees in Maryland have to pay into this? You might not get the support you get now if you just made the employees, if you made them and didn't give them a choice as you're doing with our business owners. Because you're telling our business owners they have to do it. But if you told the employees, now you have to do it and you have to carry it, I wonder if it would get the same support. And that's my problem. We can do this right now. Your theories are correct. There is a way to provide a cushion for all of these individuals, and it's that they pay into this system that you're talking about. If you'd like the mandate, I can look into that. I don't know the constitutionality, but in the meantime, we mandate it so we keep the prices low. They can all afford it. Nobody's forced to do it except the individual who will get the benefit. And I think if this is that goal, this is that laudable goal, instead of right now or ever punishing our businesses for taking that chance, let's just let the individuals do it. But that's my 2 cents for now.
I just want to make a comment. It's not so much a question because, again, I am sympathetic. People may not agree because I'm the one putting this bill in, but I'm just curious if the commentary you're making right now would still be the same commentary if we never experienced this pandemic. Because like I said, this bill has been before this committee, where I even was lead sponsor for years. And each year it's saying, you know, anti-business, it's hurting the businesses. But it was just more of a comment because
I was just saying, let's let everybody participate and let's instead treat everybody like a self-employed individual. If we want to do it that way, I think that's something we could all wrap our heads around. And if you want to make it involuntary where they're forced to keep the prices low, I'm sure these voters won't like that, but we could probably do that too. That would be fair across the board.
Understood.
Okay. All right, Delegate Howard.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Who paid for and sponsored this poll? Anybody?
Opinion Works was the poll, but I don't know who paid.
Okay, I thought it was the Maryland Family Network. Is that true?
I can't attest to that. I don't know.
I believe it was Maryland Rise.
Okay. So the argument is that we are sensitive to COVID, and I appreciate that business owner myself. Based on that and those arguments that we have heard, why the quarter basis point increase in the contribution from last year over this year? You know, last year's bill had a 0.5 basis point. This year, with our sensitivities to COVID in full swing, we're at 0.75 basis point.
So at the time of the hearing last year,
Clay Pigeon.
At the time of the hearing last year, we did have a sponsor amendment to bring it up to 0.75. So that is not because of the pandemic.
So the original bill was for 0.5 point, and then the sponsor brought it up to 0.75.
We had new modeling done by the Institute for Women's Policy Research, who has been doing the modeling for the other states that have paid family leave programs. And we also made some tweaks to the bill in response to what we had heard from committee members and from the business community. And between the changes we had made to the bill and the new data available from other states, the new estimate came up to be 0.67% of payroll would be adequate. But since it would require a statutory change, we wanted the cap to be higher than that modeling, so that if the Department of Labor needed to adjust the contribution rate in the out years, they would be able to go up to 0.75 and would not have to come back to the General Assembly to do that.
So it went from 0.5 point to 0.75 for the modeling from other states. What input did you receive? What tweaks did you made from the business community?
So we were asked by the insurance companies that they would be able to provide a similar product, and individuals could opt out in order to buy on the private market a similar product.
I bet
So
they
that
were
was one
very
of the
happy to
changes.
give you that feedback. Yeah.
We were asked by larger organizations that offer some family leave, but maybe not the full package, if we could require the programs to run concurrently.
I bet. Yeah. What about small businesses? What about micro businesses, the businesses that employ 70+% of Maryland jobs and make up the bulk of, I'm not talking about the big businesses that want to run concurrent and the insurance companies that would love to offer this product on the private market. I'm talking about the small businesses, the people that are doing $200,000 and $300,000 a year in gross sales, 400,000, 500,000. What were those limits? How many of those small businesses did you talk to? What tweaks in the bill did you make for them, and what feedback did they give you?
So we've reviewed all the testimony that was submitted to go through. The chamber has very detailed testimony. They've provided feedback to us. Some of it was looking at different definitions, and I'm trying to pull up my list. I apologize, of everything that was done. There were concerns about where the costs would be borne, whether the general fund would kick in money or not. And so we did say the costs would be borne by the program. There were explicit requests that the leave run concurrent with FMLA and you not be able to take 2 banks of leave. That came directly from a lot of small businesses. And we clarified that in the bill to say that you wouldn't get to stack that leave. You would have to take it together.
What small businesses, though? I mean, what were the standards for small business that you used?
I did not have a specific standard, but we tried to take the input they gave us and worked as much as we could into the bill without violating the integrity of the bill, that we want all Maryland workers covered by it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Delegate Brooks and then Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Valderrama, I see what you're trying to do, but my first question is whether or not, is this a payroll tax?
No.
It's not? Okay. It's not, so that it won't be mandated by the employer to pay that? Because I see whether it's got to be 50% contribution by the employee and then 50% contribution by the employer.
If I misspoke, Ms. Vaughn, correct me, but I answered no.
Oh,
It
okay.
would be taken out through payroll. It's based on payroll.
Okay. All right. And what is the fiscal note on this bill?
I have to pull it up, Mr. Delegate Brooks. I don't have it in front, but if you'd like, I can.
Yeah, I think it was something pretty close to 600 the first year, 688 million bucks. Because state and local effects, state government, local government. Yeah, so, all right. I was just curious, and I understand what you're trying to do, but being a small business owner, these impacts, even though it's as honorable as it is, it could have a major impact on the bottom line. Because right now there are so many taxes that are really being borne by the employer, like unemployment insurance. That's all funded by the employer. The employer.
I understand, Delegate Brooks, and I appreciate that you understand the intent behind it. My quick question would be, and again, I mentioned it was a deal breaker, but again, open to everyone's input. I said in the beginning of my testimony that instead of saying no, how can we make it happen? So are you in this same alignment, same agreement with Delegate Wilson that if this was self-funded by the employee only, would you be in,
Oh, if it's funded primarily by the employee?
And I'm only asking, I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just
Yeah, by the employee, because I always thought that the fastest way to solve a problem is at the initial point of contact, so, I mean, people right now, they're saving for rainy days. So, there's several options that one would have available,
Okay. And again, I appreciate because, some folks, when pieces of legislation such as this, which is totally important, comes forward, there's the mentality that the sponsors or the advocates, they're off their chain, they're not thinking, and they just want. And that is not the case here. I just want to emphasize that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah, and I believe you. And I know your intent is honorable, but I'm thinking about the impact it's going to have on the small business guy.
Understood.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Delegate Tarkoudian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Valderrama, for bringing this bill forward. I think it's a really important bill. I appreciate your openness to really thinking about how do we make it happen. I agree that that's how we should look at a lot of these bills of like, how do we move this forward as opposed to just kind of thinking of it as we can't do it or we can do it. My question to either you or to Ms. Vaughn is, I think that I try to think about each of our pieces of legislation in terms of sort of macro level costs and benefits and micro level costs and benefits. And we've talked a lot about the micro level costs. And I think that that's fair. Like it's got to be part of the conversation. We've talked about the cost of the businesses. We've talked a little bit about the cost of the employees. I wonder if you can talk about the micro level benefits, sort of benefits to businesses and benefits to employees. And then also, I think I'm trying to think about this in terms of like societally, structurally. Again, we have fiscal notes that tell us what costs are. Our fiscal notes don't always tell us what the benefits are. And so, you know, there are also costs to not solving problems. And I assume you've thought through some of these things. And I just wonder if, you know, in this mix of us thinking about the costs and benefits, if you want to talk a little bit about the broader structural societal costs and benefits of this, and maybe also about at the individual level, in addition to the costs we've talked about, what some of the benefits are.
Sure. Delegate, if you're okay. So one of the benefits we see to business, and having looked at California, who's had this program the longest, is the uptake in taking leave isn't that significantly higher than when FMLA was there. What statistically is highest is people who come back to the workforce after the leave and who stay engaged with their employer. So we see a decrease in training costs and recruitment costs, just all those turnover costs. We see a reduction in. You're going to hear later about after California, there was a reduction in child abuse because of the ability of parents to stay home with young children and get those 12 weeks and not have the stress of going back to work right away with an infant. So we see the societal benefit. There's data that's out of Canada that talks about when they implemented their family leave, women's attachment to the workforce skyrocketed in a way that those numbers weren't seen in the United States. The main difference between the two was one had family leave and one didn't. So it's a women's issue and keeping women employed, but also it increases your tax base if more women are attached to the workforce and working. We see benefits in terms of less use of nursing homes because caregivers who know they can take that time if, you know, their mother falls and breaks their hip can care during that time so that the elder doesn't have to stay in an institution and there's independent living. And then also we look at our public benefits programs, that when individuals are losing jobs or can't afford to be out on leave, they're accessing not only unemployment, but temporary cash assistance and food stamps. So broadly, we would expect to see to some extent a reduction on those programs as well. So there's both business benefits in terms of lack of turnover and happier employees, but also these bigger societal impacts that are made when we have a program like this.
Thank you.
Madam Vice Chair. Madam Vice Chair, I think she was.
Sorry, I was done. Madam Vice Chair, thank you. I was done with my question.
You're muted, Madam Vice Chair.
Well, no wonder. Delegate Adams is next.
Thank you. So the bill on page 16, of course, at the front of it, there are plenty of definitions and trying to go through and explain what the bill's meanings are when you look at words, but you don't go through the effort of defining what a serious health condition is. What is a serious health condition?
That is defined, and let me find that for you. It is defined on page 6, delegate, as an illness, an injury, an impairment, or a physical or mental condition described in paragraph 1 of this subsection that continues over an extended period of time and requires intermittent treatment.
And so, for example, would diabetes be a serious health condition?
Oh, and I apologize. I'm looking at the wrong definition. It generally involves, and I'm sorry, this is on page, higher up on page 6, inpatient care, continued treatment by a licensed provider, or continued treatment and supervision at home. So depending on the severity of the diabetes and what is necessary and your doctor certifying that you can't work, diabetes could, but it would not necessarily grant you the leave.
I mean, so I use that as an example, but the example I'm trying to raise is what is serious and what is not serious. The rationale behind the question goes to how would a bill like this get abused? Because I could have a family member, say, for example, in Key Largo, Florida, with a quote unquote serious health condition. And it appears under this law that I could, for an extended period of time, because I could financially be able to take a reduction in pay in exchange for taking off for a nice trip to Florida to quote unquote take care of a family member. And that cannot be the reason why the bill is being brought forward. But the problem is, it appears that you're in this bill unwilling to define what we mean by a serious health condition. And I just don't see how you get a bill like this to pass, because it does come down to, at the end of the day, and this is my question, is employment a privilege or is it an entitlement? Because I believe that employment is a privilege. It is a privilege to be able to go to work every day, whether you work in the public sector or the private sector. And every time we try to pass a bill, and we've passed some of these bills that border between, is it an entitlement to work for me versus is it a privilege? This bill, the way that it's written, how it's vague, seriously presents the employer with the idea that you are entitled to that job. You're entitled to leave that job and get paid for it. And oh, by the way, you're entitled to come back to the job at a later date. And because you're making such a broad, wide, expansive rationale for why someone could leave, it's sure to be abused.
I'm going to make a comment, Delegate Adams, respectfully, and say that I do believe that employment is a privilege. I do not feel entitled, but I will also say that as an employee or as a former employee to where I used to be employed, that, you know, as business owners or whomever my employer is, that you'd want to treat your employees as, you know, especially if earned, you know, good employees with benefits. I can see your anecdotal example of like it could be abused, but I think you can understand the sentiment that the whole premise pushing this bill is not to have it abused, but there are employees who are being abused by their current employers because they cannot take the necessary leave. And to say that there's no definition for serious illness and was just explained in the legislation, and Ms. Vaughn explained how, and you used the example of diabetes, depending on the severity of one's illness, it could be a number of what you may think is not serious, but it all depends on the person. Everyone's different, you know, everyone's body is different. So again, respectfully, I don't think that's an answer. It was more of a commentary to what you just insinuated.
Because what I'm saying is we're passing laws that need to be interpreted by the courts, and that words have meanings, and serious health condition has no legal meaning. That's the problem. And
I understand. So if you,
let me just
if you would,
let me just finish.
Sure.
Okay. The point that I'm trying to make about the privilege versus entitlement, we live in a country where uniquely, if someone has to leave, they can leave employment and find employment elsewhere. Trying to create a bill where you're forcing people to pay into, and employers pay into a program that promises them a seat while they're getting paid is going to get abused. I mean, that's not the question. The question is, are you really going to help people that need this when they can't really afford the partial payment anyhow? And so the people that are likely to abuse it are the ones that can most afford to work under the partial payment terms. The bill completely misses the mark. And ultimately, as an employer, I 100% agree with you that if you've got an employee, you treat them with respect and you admire them, and you also very much are flexible when they have difficult circumstances. I don't think that any good business person would argue with that. This bill is prescriptive and really is not even hitting the mark, in my opinion.
well,
Thank you.
I guess we can, there are bad apples out there, and that is what we are trying to target. And so if the issue here is the language, if you would like to provide more specifics, since it's too broad in your opinion, happy to take a look at that language, Delegate Adams. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Delegate Motz.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Delegate Valderrama, you're on the hot seat, so I'll keep, I guess the best question, you'd be the best person to ask the question to. And that's for this bill, when it's interpreted and applied, who enforces the requirements of the bill? Who oversees this?
So originally in the bill, it would be Department of Labor.
Yeah. So one of the concerns I have reading it is that when you read the bill, when you read bills, they sound one way, but when they play out in reality, they're interpreted in a very different light. And in most cases, businesses are on the business side of a requirement. The business is presumed to have the burden of proof to demonstrate that they've met. They're not presumed innocent. And I just wonder how this bill, if there was anything in the bill that did anything to protect the rights of the businesses.
Ms. Vaughn, can you take that one as far as the legal aspects?
I don't believe there's any presumption explicit in the bill. There are a number of different requirements on business in terms of making the contributions and notice requirements that the Department of Labor has been asked to enforce, but we did not put any explicit presumptions in there, and have asked the department on this, having learned from past bills, to put in clear regulations. Because I know in the past, without those regulations, businesses felt they didn't have the clear guidance they needed. And so we are explicit in that, asking for those regulations so that businesses know the rules that they are playing by.
Well, I just want to raise that for you as far as constructive criticism.
No, I appreciate that, Delegate Motz. What I was going to say was, we're just the first two panelists. There's many more.
Okay, yeah.
Your question would possibly be answered, especially by the business owners that are about to follow.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Delegate Valderrama and Ms. Vaughn. We're going to move on to the next witness, Tammy Bresnahan.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Tammy Bresnahan. I'm the Director of Advocacy for AARP Maryland. And while I appreciate your very lively discussion, I know and I appreciate the deliberation on a bill like this. You've heard what House Bill 375 does, you know who it affects, but I'd also argue that small businesses survive on the people who have money to make them operate. And we also need to look at them, and they're the employees who, go to the cigar shop or who go to the restaurant and who go to other small businesses. They keep the economy going as well. The labor force is trending in an aging workforce, especially for older working women, those most likely to be family caregivers. The percentage of women age 55 and older who work is expected to increase from 28.5 in 2015 to over 35% in 2022. There are more people over the age of 65 in the state of Maryland than there are children in public school. And those folks need a caregiver. And we're looking at least 2 people per caregiver. And as the population ages, it drops considerably. Given the aging population and the workforce, caregiver-friendly policies such as paid family leave and paid sick days are important for maintaining both economic growth and workers' own economic security. Workplace leave policies are a sound investment for employers and for America's working families and caregiving responsibilities. We ask you to deliberate on in a mild manner and to make sure that you think of all the options. We know that this isn't, a done deal, but it has been for years, and we hear your concerns, but we also know that we have a large population out there that need benefits and they need to continue with a paycheck. Thank you. And we ask you for a favorable report.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bresnahan. Delegate Arntz.
Yeah, Ms. Bresnahan, real quick, you work for AARP, correct?
I do.
And you're a nonprofit, right?
We are.
Do you have this benefit currently?
I do.
We pay for you. If you got sick, you could take off and it's paid for by a nonprofit?
So we have we have sick leave, we have annual leave, and we also have something called 80 hours of caregiving leave that I've never used. I started at AARP the year after my mother died.
Can I ask you a question? Who pays for that?
We pay for it.
Who's we?
The employer gives us a benefit, and it's not deducted out of our salary. It's a benefit.
Okay. Well, how does your employer get their money?
A multitude,
as a nonprofit.
A multitude of different ways. We, it's a membership organization. Yeah. There's also other advertising that they do. So I'm not really sure exactly how they get their money, but
I think my biggest, when I look at a bill like this, I do appreciate that everybody has needs, and we're going to run into needs because I am getting older. But I guess I always sort of look back as an employer. I always wonder who's taking care of me, because if I get sick and I go away, my business goes away. And I always find it, the good intention here is obviously a great intention. Everybody would like to have that thing to fall back on. But I always caution that when we start spending all this money, and especially at a time like right now when the businesses are being hit even heavier than they've ever been hit before, especially a small business, I just don't know if it's the most opportune time to be sitting back saying, gee, can I give more when I don't even have right now? Because I'm watching people that I know in restaurants that don't have the luxury of the benefits of some of what COVID done for their business, but what they're suffering through. And I just think sometimes, we have to look at maybe down the road, but this is a real tough time to be coming out here as a nonprofit asking for something. Wouldn't you agree?
I think what we need to do is look at all sides and make sure that we are being deliberative. As a nonprofit, I can't speak for the organization, but I do know that there is a need out there.
Well, there's a need. There's a need out there for a cure for COVID also. And I agree with you on some of this stuff. It's just, I just think at some point we really need to start looking at the businesses that are actually feeding the families and how they have to act. And if it was a great bill, I'm sure an insurance company would come up with a way to manage this and make it happen. I think we actually tried to put an amendment on paid sick leave, split the difference. Let me pay for what I don't use and I get it back. And I just think when you're looking at stuff like this, if the users want to pay for it, that's one thing, but most users can't afford it in today's market. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you, Delegate Aaron's. Delegate Adams, do you have a question or is your hand up from the previous round? Delegate Adams? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Bresnahan. We're going to move on to Aaron Sadin. I'm sure I mispronounced that. But
It's Sayedian. It's no worries. Everybody does. It's a tough name.
sorry. Okay.
Thank you for having me, Vice Chair. Yes, my name is Aaron Sayedian. I live in Montgomery County, and I'm the owner of Well Paid Maids. It's a living wage home cleaning company that operates in the DC area. As a small business owner who employs and serves Marylanders, I'm really eager to see paid family and medical leave enacted in our state. After having provided paid family and medical leave to my employees for over 3 years, I can tell you that in addition to being moral, logical, and practical, that paid leave is affordable and beneficial to businesses. So, first things first, let's talk costs. Seems to be what's on everybody's mind. As we're debating these things, one thing everybody should keep in mind is that what we're talking about is really not expensive. I have dozens of different costs as a small business owner that I'm constantly trying to control, but paid leave isn't one of them. It doesn't rate. I don't stress about it. I don't feel it. For context, my business participates in the DC paid family and medical leave program, which is entirely employer paid, and it costs me 0.62% of payroll. And so given the fiscal projections for this bill and the structure of splitting it between the employee and the employer, I don't think anybody can convince me that this is anything but affordable. And before we leave the topic of costs, let me just say that for 2 of the 3 years that I provided paid leave, the public program that I participate in now did not exist. And so I used to purchase private short-term disability insurance on the open market, and the cost was 3 times as high as what I pay now for a worse plan, meaning skimpier wage replacement and no family leave. So, please know that the private sector alternatives to a public social insurance program are inferior and more costly for business owners. So anyway, to recap, it's cheap. I know because I've been doing it, but it's not just cheap, it's a deal, because as a business owner, you get a lot of bang for your buck. I own a cleaning company. My employees do really hard work, bending, scrubbing, lugging, scraping, whatever, you name it. If somebody gets sick or gets injured, I need them to be able to rest for every single day the doctor recommends in order for them to come back safely. I have a generous PTO policy, 20 paid days off per year, but PTO can't cut it. There are a lot of illnesses and injuries and life events that we know just take longer. And so by being able to use the paid family and medical leave program, my employees can actually take the time they need when it's a situation that would either be financially impossible for me to cover via PTO, or one that they try to work through and risk their health and safety, ruin their job performance, frankly, and increase the likelihood that they have to just quit. And nobody wants that. So, to sum it up, paid family medical leave is a really negligible cost for businesses. It provides tremendous benefits. I'm not the only one who thinks so. I know there are others on this Zoom call. And, in closing, I'd just be skeptical of any business or business group that claims that, a program like this is really burdensome on employers. What's burdensome, in my opinion, not just for employers, but for employees and the community, is not having a state program. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Aaron, for being here and providing that information. I just want to make sure I understand, because it sounds like one of the questions that I think is in front of us is why not have the private market take care of it? Why not set it up so it's voluntary on the part of either businesses to opt into something or employees to opt into something? And I think if what you just said is that you had done it through private systems yourself before, but being part of the DC public system actually ends up costing less for you and your employees. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so under the private regime, I paid $66 a month per FTE. I now pay $22 a month per FTE, and it's cheaper for me. And the reason is you take out the middleman. The public program is not being run at a profit, and so I think it's just cheaper for them to administer, and we get better benefits for less cost.
Is there also sort of the larger pool of folks in DC? I'm assuming if everybody's buying into it, you have a larger pool, so you're spreading the risk differently than if you.
Sure. I'm sure it's basic insurance math as well, right? Yeah. The more people in the pool, the more costs can go down.
So sort of like why we would do maybe public unemployment insurance system as opposed to a private unemployment, or public workers' comp that everyone's paying into as opposed to private system for that. Is that kind of, as a business owner, how you think through it?
Exactly. And another thing, as you mentioned, kind of different flavors of insurance to keep in mind is that family leave doesn't exist as a form of insurance, at least in the mid-Atlantic. I know it doesn't exist in Maryland or Virginia or DC. You know, I was trying to, when I was buying short-term disability as a kind of private solution for this, I was trying to see, like, can I add family leave on this so that if a father has a child, you know, he can take a family leave, even though there's no kind of medical incident that happened to him. And, you know, I was told by the reps that, no, we don't sell anything like that. And so it's not even a question of the private version or the public version in some cases. It's a question of, you know, in the case of family leave, even existing at all.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Delegate Adams.
Thank you. You mentioned in describing insurance as being a way to spread cost out. That's not the definition of insurance. Definition of insurance is pricing risk. And how do you price risk on a bill like this? Risk meaning how people are using the money.
Is that a question for me?
Of course.
That
How
is.
do we price risk in a bill like this?
Insurance is not just a mere collection of premiums. It's how do you price the risk? I'm calling risk as in how is the insurance being used? Like if you have car insurance, you have an accident, that's a risk. It's priced into your premium, and then you get your car fixed. You're calling this insurance. Insurance is not premiums, it's pricing risk. So how do you price people taking time off like this?
So I would not sweat that, but Gord.
I would say you'd have to ask an actuary. I mean, I know that as a business owner, I think what you're trying to get at is just, I mean, I recall your example about, you know, fraud and making sure that kind of everything is ensconced in the system, that, you know, it's operating in a way that's fair and people are not abusing it. I can just tell you that having administered this, you know, I run a small business. I have 10 employees now. I had a bit more before COVID. I haven't experienced anyone trying to take advantage of the system. And, you know, it's not as if they just kind of fill out a form and there's no interaction with their employer. It's a human interaction. I learned that somebody's having a baby. I learned that somebody's taking, you know, care of someone in their family. And, you know, we go from there.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Delegate Howard.
Thanks. So I'm looking at a Washington Post article that talks about you and your company and what you do. And one of the things highlighted in that article says that you charge about $70 more per 1-bedroom, 3-hour job. So when you talk about the fact that you don't have a problem financing this type of thing, isn't it true that you're just basically passing that cost along to the customer, A, and B, the mission of your company is also to find like-minded customers that feel the way you do about these type of legislative priorities in both the DC and I guess now Maryland area?
Well, I guess to answer the second part of your question first, I'd say that, you know, I have all kinds of customers. Some folks are, you know, really into what I'm trying to do in terms of our benefits and compensation and all the rest of it.
That's definitely what the paper says that you say, yeah.
Yeah, but we also have people who, you know, they just want the job done well. They want it done competently, and that's why they use us, because they think that because I professionalize the way that we do our work, that they're going to get a good service from us. And, you know, I happen to think that's true. And so we have all kinds of customers. But in terms of price, passing on price, whatever, you know, obviously the cost of any good or service is going to reflect the different inputs that go into it. For me,
I think that's what we're getting at here.
The reason I charge a premium is because not only do we offer, you know, paid family medical leave, we also offer health, dental, and vision insurance. Our starting wage is $17 an hour, and I offer 22 paid days off per year. So in terms of the basket of compensation that goes into our pricing, paid family medical leave is a really, really negligible part of it. Like I said, it's $22 per FTE per month. It's a really small.
I know, I appreciate that. I just, when you say I have no problem making this payment, it's no big deal. Well, that's because ultimately it takes grains of sand to make a heap, right? And ultimately you're passing on the cost, whether they're one or many, a different type of scale, you're passing that along to the customer. So of course you don't have a problem making that. So I just wanted to be a little bit more transparent as far as the position is concerned. It's based on pricing passed on to the customer. So thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
All right, thank you very much. We are going to move on to the next witness, Ken Capone, or Capone. I'm sure I mispronounced that too.
Hello, committee members. My name is Ken Capone. I am the Public Policy Director for People on the Go, which is Maryland's statewide self-advocacy organization. We are here to testify in support of HB 375, the Family and Medical Leave Insurance Program. As many of you are probably aware, nearly all of us will need to take leave at some point, whether to care for our family members or our own serious medical condition or disability, or the joyous occasion of welcoming a new child. Without access to paid leave, workers often face a difficult and unnecessary decision: health and family, or work and making ends meet. Not now, but in the past. My mother had to take off work to care for me if I got sick or my support needs intensified, or even longer when I had surgery. I know it was a hardship for us. It would have been nice to have something like this back then. More than 70% of family members caring for a person with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities report that caregiving interfered with their work, and the odds of an employee losing income increases by 38% if the person lives with a child with disabilities, and by 29% if the person lives with and supports an adult with disabilities. That is a significant amount of people experiencing economic hardship. When people having access to dedicated paid family leave, it reduces the odds of losing income by 30%. As more people with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities are supported to work, these additional benefits are important. People with disabilities need leave for the same reasons as all other workers, and in the U.S., addressing one's own health condition or disability makes up 55% of all leave taken. People with disabilities are more likely to be employed in low-wage, part-time jobs that provide fewer supports. Access to paid leave increases opportunities for people with disabilities so that we can be supported when needs intensify, just like I did from time to time. The benefits to people with disabilities and their families are clear. Both the person that is sick and the person that is caring for them have time they need to be together and get or give support. They will be less stressed, which in turn speeds up the healing process. In conclusion, HB 375 gives people with disabilities the comfort of knowing that they shouldn't feel guilty anymore because they may need extra care from a family member from time to time, and it won't be a hardship on the family. Finally, we strongly believe that if the state wants to pass this legislation, which our leadership wholeheartedly supports, there must be funding for developmental disability supports and services so that we can be compliant with the legislation as it is intended. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Capone. We appreciate it. Any questions from Mr. Capone? All right, seeing none, again, thank you for being available today to give us your perspective. Next, we'll move to Andy Shalal. I probably mispronounced that too.
You did just fine.
Okay.
Hi, how are you, everyone? I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody here. We've been talking about this issue for quite some time, and I know in DC we finally passed it, and it's been, we haven't really seen a real track record of how it's going to be working, but it seems to be working okay so far. As far as I know, I'm trying to get some data from our HR department, excuse me, to find out more about specifics of what the issue has been, how it's worked out so far. But I think, we're far behind with this. I can imagine, but a lot of developed countries are looking at us and saying, this is pretty ridiculous to be talking about this at this time. They're way ahead of us on these issues with the idea of employee-employer relations and how we operate in this country. Unfortunately, we're a little bit behind here on this issue. And I think time will tell that this is the right thing to do, and it's always a good time to do the right thing. I really believe in that, like Aaron and others that have spoken before me. We're talking about cost, and as a business person, of course, I had to be concerned with cost. That's the bottom line everybody talks about. The most expensive thing for a business, and those of you that have small businesses have worked, are unhappy employees and turnover. That to me is far more costly than anything that this bill is going to impose on employers. We're talking about, somebody mentioned if I have a $200,000 business, a small business, what will the cost be? Will that break me? Well, for $200,000, let's say half of that is your payroll, $100,000, you're talking about $670 that's divided by you and the employee. It's not a lot of money, let's face it. One unhappy employee one turnover for us, it costs us one employee to train and retrain and make sure they don't make mistakes and everything else to bring them back on board, cost us $4,000. That's pretty expensive. So for me, it's just logical. From a business perspective, it makes perfect sense. I don't want to repeat what everybody else says, the moral issue and all of that. I think it's important, but I also think this is really good business.
All right. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Oh,
Any
and by the way, if I could add just one more
sorry.
thing, please. I
Sure.
have one location in Maryland, in Hyattsville. I'm opening two. Right now, I'm sitting in one that's in Baltimore that's getting ready to open in about 4 weeks or so, and we're opening one in Columbia, Maryland. So this means a lot to me because I'm, starting to make inroads into Maryland.
Very good. Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Scholl. I don't see any questions, so we appreciate you coming today or taking the time to be here. I guess you didn't have to come, but thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much.
Then next, we would hear from Josie Rhodes. Is
Hi.
Ms. Rhodes here?
Hi, can you hear
Okay,
me? All right.
there you go. Sure.
I'm a small business owner in Lauraville, Northeast Baltimore. The owner of a cafe. We employ about 10 employees. And not to be overly redundant, but I do support House Bill 375. And since cost does seem to be the major issue here, I agree with exactly what Andy said. Employee turnover is extremely costly. And with this bill, I believe that it will strengthen employee loyalty and morale and decrease employee turnover. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you. Short and sweet. We appreciate that. Any questions for Ms. Rhodes? All right, seeing none. Thank you again for taking the time to be here today. Next, we have Ricardo Jones. Ricardo Jones. Michelle Siri.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Michelle Siri. I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Law Center of Maryland. I'm also here representing the Maryland Legislative Agenda for Women and Law, which has included HB 375 as one of its priority bills this year. I'd like to thank Delegate Valderrama, and I will try and be brief, but I really want to talk a little bit about what Delegate Charkunian was talking about, and that's, the bigger macro picture. And that's why I'm here today, is because we believe at the Women's Law Center that the lack of paid family leave is one of the biggest gender justice issues facing our nation right now. And we've been saying it for years. Women make up two-thirds of women rather in Maryland are sole primary co-breadwinners for their families. And right now, and before the pandemic, frankly, we've been bearing the brunt of the caregiving. It's really hitting critical mass right now. Many of you may have heard about the She Session, which is what economists are calling the just havoc that's being wreaked on women in the workforce. Women are overrepresented in many of the sectors, accounting for as much as 83% of the jobs lost in hospitality, leisure, restaurant, education, and other sectors that are really hardest hit by the pandemic. Particularly devastating for Black and Latina women, who are disproportionate percentages of those sectors. And it should be noted that in December, while men gained 16,000 jobs in the national workforce, women lost 156,000 jobs during the same time period. Put it another way, women accounted for all the net jobs lost in this country. And in January, another 250,000 women left the job force. And so it's for a lot of reasons have to do with the lack of paid sick leave. It's a sticky floor. Anytime that a woman or anytime a child is born, a partner is ill, parents are passing, the women must put their careers on hold and get pushed back down the ladder of success. It's also called the leaky pipeline. Anytime a woman enters the workforce, the same rate as men, but every time their career progresses, the number of women dwindle as they've got forced out by the lack of paid leave, the lack of, or the increase in caregiving demands. I see my time is about to run out. I would just say that we know that women with paid leave are 70% more likely to return to work after a major life event. And for all of those reasons, we would urge a favorable report on HB 375. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Siri. Any questions for Ms. Siri? Seeing none, thank you for your time today. And we will move on to MJ Kraska.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is MJ Kraska. I'm the Associate Director of Social and Economic Justice at the Maryland Catholic Conference. The conference is in support of this legislation, which you can read my written testimony that I've submitted. I am also here today in support of this bill as a veteran of the United States Air Force and member of the Maryland Air National Guard. Military service members, veterans, and their families make enormous sacrifices for our country. A service member's foreign deployment away from family to a foreign country or a war zone can disrupt their family's stability and economic security. If service members return from a deployment wounded, ill, or injured physically or mentally, their family members often become informal caregivers, making sacrifices to help with their loved one's recovery, rehabilitation, and reintegration. Paid family leave programs such as the one laid out in HB 375 can provide crucial support to military families, service members, and veterans. Veterans and their families are a vulnerable population with health problems and economic insecurity that can be compounded by a lack of paid family leave. There are approximately 9.5 million veterans in the United States, including almost 3 million post 9/11 veterans. More than 40% of the post 9/11 veterans have a service-related connected disability. Many veterans struggle with mental and physical health problems, unemployment, homelessness, and face problems receiving care from underfunded and mismanaged federal programs dictated to veterans and their families. There are also too many post 9/11 veterans living paycheck to paycheck and struggling to meet their basic needs. Military families and family caregivers provide vital informal care to veterans and service members, but struggle without paid family leave to also care for their own economic security as well as physical, emotional health. Given the challenges service members, veterans, and their caregivers face, it is vital that military families be able to take time away from work to care for themselves or their loved one without sacrificing their own income. With that, I would like to thank you for your time, and I would strongly urge a favorable report for HB 375.
Thank you, Mr. Kraska. Any questions for Mr. Kraska? Delegate Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I appreciate it. Sir, you represent whom?
The Maryland Catholic Conference.
But you had like a longer title there.
Oh, I'm the Associate Director of Social and Economic Justice.
What the heck is that?
So what my department does, we advocate for social and economic issues related to anything from public safety, criminal justice reform, environmental issues, economic issues, poverty, and healthcare issues.
So I guess I'm a little confused because to me, the Catholic Church, part of their job itself is to assist, single mothers and mothers who have need of assistance in difficult times. And that's what the church has traditionally done. And so it seems to me like you and the church, and I say this as a Catholic because I'm thoroughly disgusted with your testimony. It seems like you and the church.
I don't think we have to be quite that difficult about it.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I got elected to ask questions. It's unfortunate, but
asking questions and being insulting are two different things.
I'm not being insulting.
Ask your question.
Okay, let me ask my question. So my question for you is, why is the church crossing the line and going to the state and saying the state should do things that the church in the past was supposed to be doing to begin with?
Yes, Delegate Fisher. I apologize if I have offended you in any way with my testimony. What I would say, speaking to your question, is that the church advocates for anything that will involve dignity of work and dignity of the human person. So I would say that this bill does just that.
So, you have not, your testimony, nor have you, have not offended me. I'm offended by the church, okay? And it takes a lot to offend me, believe me. But, as a Catholic, it's just like, I'm sorry, the purpose of the church is to do exactly the stuff that you're now telling the state to do as a representative of the church. And it just seems really odd that the church has decided to hire someone, and not you personally, just anyone, to cross over that line. So anyway, that's just, feel free to comment if you want.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kraska, if you have any comments?
No, Vice Chair.
Okay. Thank you for being here today. We appreciate your testimony. We're going to move on to Laura Wheeldryer.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and committee members. I'm Laura Wheel-Dryer, Executive Director from Maryland Family Network. We're a statewide nonprofit and the leading voice in early childhood. And today I'm here to speak on behalf of babies and their parents in strong support of HB 375. Again, just like Michelle Siri before me, Delegate Charkutian talked about macro and micro benefits. And that's really what I'm here to talk about today as well, because I think there's a generally acknowledged standard that what is good for parents and babies ends up being good for society as a whole. And the great news for this committee is that every other industrialized country in the world has a paid family and leave policy, and 9 other states and the District of Columbia also have passed the paid family leave policy. So we have a lot to learn from other states and other countries about the incredible benefits, both macro and micro, that come from passing a policy such as this. I could be sitting in front of you today with a huge stack of public health research about the benefits of time for babies, for moms, for dads. So what I want to talk to you about today is the powerful outcomes that we can expect from a piece of legislation like this, and that I am sure we all agree they're outcomes that we want for Marylanders. For example, reduced infant mortality rates and long-term health benefits for children. This is quite simply the result of more time to breastfeed, to bond, to attend well-child medical visits and ensure that children receive all necessary immunizations. These are long-term benefits for children's health, especially our most vulnerable and disadvantaged children. Early detection and timely intervention for potential developmental delays. We also see increased health benefits for new mothers and increased engagement of fathers. I could go on, but I will leave you with this thought. James Heckman, Nobel Award-winning economist, says that any intervention in the earliest years of a child's life produces a up to 13% return on investment. And that is the kind of thing we are talking about for Maryland's youngest children and their parents in time to care. So now is the time to secure the best beginnings for our children and the best future for our state. We urge a favorable report. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Wheel-Dryer. Questions from Ms. Wheel-Dryer, whose name I've also mispronounced. But...
No, not at all. You did great.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I see no questions.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. We will move on to Claudia Remington.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in strong support of HB 375. My name is Claudia Remington. I'm the Executive Director of the State Council on Child Abuse and Neglect, SCAN. SCAN, a multidisciplinary body that makes recommendations to the Governor and General Assembly, has spent more than a decade advocating for a statewide plan and policies to prevent and mitigate child maltreatment and other adverse childhood experience, or ACEs. Investing in healthy development of our children builds a strong foundation for kids, for families, for employers, and for society. In addition to the reasons stated by others and in our written testimony, SCAN supports the bill because paid family leave policies have been shown to reduce child abuse and other ACEs. Abusive head trauma is a leading cause of fatal child abuse in young children. Research has shown that paid family leave is linked with fewer cases of abusive head trauma in infants. For example, California state with paid family leave reported reduced rates of abusive head trauma as compared with 7 other states without the policy. Abusive head trauma declined in California, while other states' numbers actually rose during the Great Recession. What's the connection between the reduction of abusive head trauma and paid family leave? Parental stress and maternal depression are risk factors for child maltreatment. Abusive head trauma is often a reaction to a baby's incessant crying and can result in long-term damage with even death to the infant. Paid family leave is associated with both a reduction in parental stress and maternal depression. The CDC's publication, Preventing ACEs, Leveraging the Best Available Evidence, identifies overriding policies known to reduce childhood trauma. 2, strengthening economic supports for families and ensuring a strong start for children are relevant to HB 375. Research shows that parents facing financial hardship are more likely to experience stress, depression, and conflict in their relationships and families. All compromise parenting and increase the risk for violence and other ACEs. Strengthening economic supports for families is a multi-generational strategy that improves parents' ability to meet children's basic physical and emotional needs, prevents child abuse and other ACEs, and addresses the needs of parents and children so both can succeed and achieve lifelong health and well-being. For these reasons, SCAN urges a favorable report on HB 375. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Remington. Delegate Wilson has a question.
Claudia, it's not a question, it's more of a statement. I respect you dearly, and for those that don't know, Claudia and I have been working together for years. So please reach out to me on this, on the offline on this bill, because as you see, I have a lot of grave concerns. And I know you're a bleeding heart hippie, but you're a good friend of mine, and I hope that we can, have a discussion about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Wilson, and thank you, Ms. Remington. I do not see any other questions.
Thank you, I guess.
Going to move to Kendra Massey. I'm sorry, Delegate Howard, did you have a question?
No, I did not. I was not on mute, sorry.
All right. Kendra Massey, are you here instead of Rikara Jones?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. If you'd like to go now, that'd be great.
Okay, how you doing, everyone? I'm pleased to submit this testimony on SB 200, the Time Care Act of 2021. I'm a proud member of the 1199 SEIU and would like to tell you how important paid family leave will be to me. Like many working parents, I've struggled with juggling home and work duties during this pandemic. I have worked at Chase Preston for 7 years. I love my job there. I also love my kids, of course, my 6-year-old son, who started kindergarten last fall, and my 1-year-old daughter. My son has suffered from not having proper learning environment in online school. It really broke my heart to come home from work every day and find out that he is having a hard time doing school on the computer. I knew I needed to be at home to help him. Luckily, I received extended family leave through the CARES Act. This allowed me to have 3 days off a week to help my son with school issues for 2 months from September to early November of 2020. I was able to work with him to make sure he is doing well in school and coping with the stress of the pandemic. The leave was a godsend, even though I only received 2/3 of my regular pay during those 2 months. It was worth it so I could be there for my son. I'm happy to report that he is now doing well. I'm grateful that I had the time with my son, but it will be a full year before I or others in my situation can take any leave again, even EFMLA. And there are a lot of people who have been in my situation. Just about everyone with kids in my facility took the EFMLA leave offered to them. Maryland needs to do more to help in working families by passing the paid family leave bill. Many working families don't have paid leave through their jobs, so they have to either take unpaid time off to care for their family members or when they are sick. Paid leave registration in Maryland will help people in this state, including working moms like me, who need support to keep our children safe and during this difficult time. Other states and countries have done it. We should too. I urge to pass the Time Care Act bill of 2021.
Thank you, Ms. Massey. Any questions from Ms. Delegate Wilson, is your hand still up from the last, or do you have a question? Okay, thank you, Ms. Massey. We don't have any questions for you today. We appreciate your time. Joe Schiff.
Hi, Vice Chair Dumais, members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Joe Schifrin. I live in Bethesda, Maryland, in District 16, and I'm writing on behalf of Jews United for Justice in support of HB 375, the Time to Care Act. JUFJ, Jews United for Justice, organizes more than 5,500 Jewish Marylanders and allies in support of local campaigns for social, racial, and economic justice. The lack of paid family and medical leave has impacted my husband and me twice in the last 22 years. In 1998, we discovered that my husband's mother, who was 86, living alone and diabetic, could not manage herself or her home. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. She was so adamant about not wanting to move to an assisted living community or nursing home, so we found a house that could be adapted for 2 families and moved in. Her health began to decline, and without having a paid family and medical leave program in my employment, I was forced to leave the paid workforce and take care of her. 15 years later, I was working as an independent contractor when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. The chemotherapy I received every 2 weeks made me sick for the first 11 or 12 days of the cycle, so it was nearly impossible for me to work for several months. A paid family and medical leave law would have reduced a great deal of the stress associated with being sick by lessening the financial burden. At the same time I was dealing with my breast cancer, a single mother who lived nearby was suffering with the same diagnosis, but she continued to work through her treatment because she didn't have the support she needed to take time off from work. Consequently, she never had the chance to rest and recover. Months later, as I was getting back on my feet, I learned that she had died. I wonder if things might have been different for her if she had access to paid family and medical leave. Nearly every one of us will face a situation where we need to take paid time off for an extended period of time from work, whether to bond with a new child, take care of a loved one whose health is in peril, or take care of ourselves when an unexpected injury or illness strikes. Please make 2021 the year in which we pass the Time to Care Act and finally recognize the universal needs of Maryland workers. I respectfully urge a favorable report on HB 375, and I'd like to suggest that those of the delegates who've been very critical of this bill refer to an issue paper prepared for the 2020 Maryland legislative session by state employees, which indicated that when auditing existing programs, employers surveyed generally report that the legislation has minimal or positive impact on businesses. And other studies have shown that there is almost no fraud associated with these programs. Thank you for your time, and I urge your favorable report on this bill.
Thank you, Ms. Schifrin. Any questions for Ms. Schifrin? Seeing none, we appreciate your time today. Tracy Guy Decker.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair Dumais and members of the committee for your time today. And a quick thank you to Mr. Kraska for your military service. My name is Tracy Guy Decker. I'm a Baltimore native, lucky enough to be once again living in Baltimore City in the 41st District. I say that I'm lucky because for the past 12 years, the location of my home has been determined, at least in part, by the needs of the US Navy. You see, in addition to the many identities I carry with me all the time, one of those is Navy wife. And it is as a military spouse that I speak to you today in support of HB 375, commonly known as Time to Care Act of 2021. My Navy chief husband has been stationed overseas since November of 2019. When he received his orders for an unaccompanied, that means I and our daughter was not invited to go, tour, we had 3 months to make arrangements and say our goodbyes. At the time, I had earned sufficient personal leave at my job to take time off in advance of our separation, and that time was truly a gift. And as tough as it has been for us, many of my counterparts have even greater burdens to carry. Women and men whose spouses are in the Reserve or the National Guard can face the logistical and emotional upheaval of deployment with as little as 30 days notice. And like me, many Guard and Reservists' spouses don't have easy access to the formal and informal supports that are available to those who actually live on military bases. Military service always takes a toll on service members' families, but we do not have to allow a lack of paid leave to compound those sacrifices. Time to Care Act can help ensure every military family has the benefit of paid leave that I was able to access. I would also like to note that, in my opinion, it is more important to focus on the reward of a large percentage of workers and families who need these kinds of supports and businesses who want to take care of their employees, rather than what is a truly minimal risk that a handful of people might possibly abuse it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Guy Decker. Are there any questions for Ms. Guy Decker? Seeing none, again, thank you very much for your time. And we will move to Sharon Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. You want to set the clock? Okay. Good afternoon,
there you
everyone.
go.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharon Long. I live in Fort Washington, Maryland, and I have primary progressive multiple sclerosis, which is a condition, a chronic illness where there are lesions in my brain along as well on my spine as well. I ask that you would favorably look upon this bill and pass it. I'm only about 2 years out being diagnosed. And quite frankly, I don't know what's going to happen as far as me being able to work. I work full time. I like working full time. I have been brought up by 2 parents that have a strong work ethic, and I and my sister both have a strong work ethic. We are doing everything we can in the MS world to remain as useful people in the workforce. And that's where I am. I want to work. I am not asking that you pass this bill so it can be abused, as some people have mentioned. But if I ever do need this time, it would be helpful to have some form of payment, because my bills, my copay, my rent, those things do not care if you have MS or anything else. They are still going to be coming. To have any income coming in would be a benefit for my family who takes care of me, and also me as far as getting these bills taken care of. Thank God it's not a lot. I work full time, as I mentioned, and I do not take that lightly, especially in the midst of a pandemic. I know it's a blessing to be able to work. And for those that are in charge of small businesses, I get what you're saying. I really do. But if you have a great employee that really wants to work for you, hopefully you will take them in mind and do what you can to help them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Long. Any questions for Ms. Long? Thank you very much for your testimony, and we hope you continue to do well. Next, Diana Phillip.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Dumais and members of the Economic Matters Committee. My name is Diana Phillip. I'm the Executive Director for NARAD Pro-Choice Maryland, and we are here in support of House Bill 375. Our organization is an advocate for reproductive health rights and justice, and as a part of our efforts to protect the reproductive freedom of all Marylanders, we believe that employees should have access to paid family medical leave to be able to care for their reproductive lives, as well as care for any children they have in a parenting role. The inability to possess or to access paid family medical leave has particular impact on women who often take on the majority of responsibilities for caring for children, disabled relatives, and ailing older family members who make up almost 2/3 of minimum wage workers. The Family Medical Leave Program would be particularly helpful to new mothers, allowing the time to recover properly and care for their newborns without worrying about affording basic needs. With some women experiencing postpartum depression after labor, paid family medical leave will provide them with both time and continuing financial support to seek treatment. Because of workplace demands, nearly 1 in 4 new mothers return to their jobs in less than 2 weeks after giving birth because they cannot afford to take unpaid leave. Locating adequate childcare has proven problematic for these families, as Maryland bans placing newborns under 6 weeks of age in licensed childcare facilities. It's also important to note research suggests that paid family leave can reduce stress and depression for new mothers and contribute to meaningful bonding between parent and child, which improves children's responses to external pressures and reduces risk factors for child abuse, which has been mentioned previously. And that 2016 study in California, that there's a lower hospital admission rate for babies suffering from deliberately inflicted head injuries since passing this paid family leave in 2004 was compared with 7 states, one of which was Maryland. I want to also emphasize that we need to really look at how young people in our state are seeking these benefits. And if we don't give them these benefits, they will go to other states. And that is a very serious concern. Thank you. And I urge a favorable report for House Bill 375.
Thank you very much, Ms. Phillip. Any questions for Ms. Phillip? Seeing none, again, thank you for your time today. Cassandra Gomez.
Thank you to the Chair and Committee for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Cassandra Gomez, and I'm a staff attorney at A Better Balance. A Better Balance is a national legal fairness in the workplace. Please meet the conflicting demands of work. I've been working on paid family and leave issues in states throughout the country for over a decade.
Ms. Gomez, we're having a little trouble hearing you. I don't know if you can get closer to your microphone.
How's this?
That's better.
Great, thank you. The need for Maryland to pass paid family and medical leave is overwhelming. Nationwide, about 3 in 5 private sector workers lack access to short-term disability insurance through their employers, leaving them vulnerable when they need time off from work to address their serious health needs. And in the US, only 20% of private sector workers receive paid family leave through their employers to bond with a new child or to care for a seriously ill or injured family member. Among low-income workers, this number is even lower. This lack of access has forced far too many workers to sacrifice their savings or lose their job altogether when they need the time to care for themselves or their families. In particular, paid family and medical leave has been critical for workers as we continue to grapple with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it will be needed to address the lasting health impacts of this crisis. We believe that HB 375 is a strong paid family and medical leave bill that includes key policy elements that will ensure a successful program for Marylanders, building on lessons learned from existing state programs. Among other strengths, it will provide at least 12 weeks of ensuring that workers have a meaningful amount of leave to care for themselves and their families at a wage replacement rate that workers can afford to use while protecting workers. However, as detailed in our written testimony, we are concerned that the private plan language currently in the bill is insufficient and urge you to amend this language to provide clear and specific minimum rules and requirements. We thank you for the opportunity to submit this testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Gomez. Any questions for Ms. Gomez? All right, seeing none, thank you for your time. We are now going to move to the opposition. Champ McCullough. I did notice. Mr. McCullough, are you here today? I don't see him on the feed, so I'll try him again in a minute. Christine Walters, I'm sorry.
No worries. Here I come. I'm on my way. Good afternoon, and thank you, everyone. Madam Vice Chair, committee members. I thank you for your time this afternoon. My name is Christine Walters. I'm a human resources and employment law consultant. You have my 5 pages of written testimony, and I'll share just a few non-cost related highlights. I appreciate Ms. Vaughn's prior testimony, but it appears that section 8.3202 may still impose a new paid leave mandate on employers. It reads, the purpose of the program is to provide temporary benefits to a covered employee who is taking leave from employment, but leave is not defined in the bill. So I suggest it be defined and clarify that leave refers only to time off from work to which an employee is already entitled and does not require an employer to provide additional time off. Section 8.3-703A provides that an employer may allow an employee to use paid leave. It's a common practice for employers to require equity. That is, all employees have to exhaust all their accrued paid leave first. I would recommend that this read that an employer may require rather than may allow. Section 8.3-801 of the bill requires employers to give employees notice of their rights at 3 separate times. I'm aware of no federal, state, or local law that requires triplicate notice. Section 8.3-202 of the bill reads, this title may not be construed to diminish an employer's obligation to comply with an employer policy. So that may imply an employer could not reduce an existing leave benefit to help offset the cost of this tax. I would suggest that or an employer policy be deleted. Generally, the fiscal note leaves out at least 7 other paid and unpaid leave mandates, yet still reads that the bill has a significant impact. I agree. Last year, a nonprofit employer suggested it would cost them $41,500. Another employer has a voluntary leave donation program. This wouldn't be voluntary for their employees. I respectfully request an unfavorable report and suggest this may be referred to summer study. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Walters. Any questions for Ms. Walters?
Madam Vice Chair.
Your time to, I'm sorry,
Madam
Delegate
Vice
Valderrama.
Just a quick question. Sure. And I'm sorry, Christine, I didn't catch your last name, but I did see your written testimony. And just based on what you just said, am I to assume that your language, the language that you were verifying, is it just that of an issue? You did mention fiscal at the end, but if the language were tightened per se, based on your testimony, would you then be in support, or you're still not in support?
I still would not. There's what I just shared were just a couple, not all the points about which I have concerns. So there are others in the written testimony. Generally speaking, I probably would not support for a variety of reasons, and I'm happy to have that conversation offline if that would be helpful.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
Sure, thank you. All right, Ms. Walters, thank you for your testimony. Mr. McCullough, are you now here? I thought I saw you at the bottom of my list.
I am.
McCullough?
Thank you. I was having a little computer difficulty when you tried to pull me up before. I'm here on behalf of Maryland AGC, Commercial Construction Trade Association. We're in opposition to HB 375. You've heard, I think, in great depth the financial arguments. I'd like to address a couple other items which hopefully, if the bill should get out of committee, it can be addressed. There's no justification required from employees for requests for leave. Apparently, it's the employee honor system. And the assumption is that all employees are honest and can request and get leave. And the employer has no ability to say, well, no, I'm sorry, you can't. That's particularly true of intermittent leave, where the only burden on the employee is that he makes a reasonable effort not to unduly disrupt his employer's operations. But the flip side is the employer has no ability to say, well, yes, you are unduly disrupting the operation, and no, you can't have the leave. Those issues of control of a workplace and workplace operation have to be addressed. Let me turn to the remedies. An employee who makes a false claim at most faces a year without the ability to make another request for leave. An employer, on the other hand, faces a $1,000 fine and is exposed to both administrative action by the secretary and civil action by a disgruntled employee. So the employer is at great jeopardy, much more so than an employee is. And should it go to a civil action, there is no standard for the award of punitive damages. These are very important issues that need to be addressed if it is the committee's will to pass this bill. As I said at the outset, we're in opposition to the bill, and we would respectfully request an unfavorable report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCullough. Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. McCullough, for being here. And I appreciate that you and I don't always agree on things, but I've always found you to offer really thoughtful feedback, and you've helped me with several of my bills in improving them and ultimately passing one of them. And so I guess I'm wondering, I'm hearing some of your specific concerns. I hear that you're opposed to the bill generally. Do you feel like there are some pieces of this that could be workable? And for example, if those components that you just outlined were addressed, could you live with it? I get that you don't love it. Are there other pieces that you feel like have to be addressed? I'm hearing from the sponsor a real desire to sort of take this as something that we could work on, recognizing that maybe this isn't perfect right this minute. And so I've seen you be somebody who's worked with sponsors on bills that you oppose. And I'm just wondering, how you feel about doing that on this one, taking up the sponsor on her offer. And if you, in addition to this piece that you outlined, are there other pieces that you think need some work?
Delegate, thank you for your very gracious comments about my help. I'm not sure it's as much as you might think. With respect to this particular bill, the tough part, I think, are not the issues that I've raised, because I think that the committee could deal with them, and with the sponsor's willingness to be flexible, I think those types of issues can be worked out. All of which leads you up to the most difficult issue, which is the cost. You've heard some employers say that they think the costs are justified. Other employers will not make that same judgment. And if there is some way to run this as a trial, that would allay, I think, many employers' concerns, because then you'd have real world data in Maryland from real world Maryland employers. That may be a very difficult trial to structure. It may not be acceptable to the sponsor, but unless there's some way to deal with the financial issue, I think you'll find that many businesses, if not virtually all businesses, are going to resist this bill simply because they can't deal with the cost issues and the disruption of work schedules. I hope that's responsive.
Well, no, that's helpful. I appreciate that. I think the piece that's the most intriguing to me about this approach is the sort of economies of scale of having everyone buying into the same essentially insurance pool and then spreading out the risk across all the businesses. And so I'm just trying to imagine, like, if I'm open to the idea of doing a trial. I'm trying to figure out if we could actually measure what all the benefits could be if we didn't have sort of everybody in that same pool. But thank you for your comments, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely. I see no other questions. Thank you, Mr. McCullough, for being here and testifying. We will move to Ashley Duckman.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, for the opportunity to appear before you today. For the record, Ashley Duckman on behalf of the Maryland Chamber and our more than 5,000 business and federated partners, here in opposition to the bill before you as it is presently drafted. And I want to start by saying that the Chamber and its members, at least for the years that I've been here, the last 2 sessions, have recognized that paid family and medical leave programs are being implemented in other states, and that there is an ongoing policy discussion at the federal level on this topic. And we generally agree with the intent of the legislation, and that it is seeking to help employees balance the challenges that exist at the intersection of work and family. And to that end, in support of that intent, and generally agreeing with the intent of the legislation, we formed an internal working group last session comprised of business owners of all sizes, labor and employment experts, HR professionals, to really work through the proposed legislation line by line, section by section, in an attempt to propose constructive changes and work with the advocates to find some areas of agreement. And while we acknowledge that some small tweaks and changes have been made to the bill over time, we still do not believe that as it is presently drafted and before you today, it effectively balances the needs of employees with the economic and operational realities faced by employers, particularly, as you've heard today, in the wake of the current situation we find ourselves in with the global pandemic. We have provided you thorough written testimony outlining many areas of concern, cost being the greatest. This is the largest concern that I'm hearing from my membership, so I don't want to belabor that point. I do want to say that other states that have implemented similar programs have recognized the impact on smaller employers and have incorporated provisions into their programs that relieve some of the pressure on these employers by either exempting them or reducing contributions. The other thing I would mention in my limited amount of time is as it relates to definitions. Many of the definitions and terms in the bill are either not consistent with or extend well beyond those within FMLA. These variations make it complicated for employers in terms of managing sort of the 2 different programs. Length of leave, as defined by the bill, continues to be a challenge for us, and many other reasons. I do want to say, on the bill before you today, the Chamber respectfully requests an unfavorable report, but we do look forward to working with the bill sponsor and other stakeholders toward an outcome that balances the needs of employees, like I said, with the economic and operational realities of our employers. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Delegate Charkoudian, your hand is still up. Is that from before, or do you have a question? Okay. I see no questions for you, Ms. Duckman. Thank you for your testimony and for for testifying here today. Christopher Costello.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair. My name is Chris Costello. For the record, I'm here representing the Howard County Chamber of Commerce. The Howard County Chamber of Commerce is 700 members, small, large, nonprofit, government entities, all working together for the betterment of Howard County. You have our written comments, and we support and we support the comments that you heard from the Maryland Chamber of Commerce and other business organizations. Paid family and medical leave insurance program would place an unreasonable burden on employers in the economy. The cost to the state of Maryland by itself should be a concern. It's what, 3.345 million and $9.2 million in benefits. But we appreciate that the sponsor understands that the employers are concerned about the needs of employees. Employers experience many of the same problems, and they can't stop their business because of this. If they did, that would just create a situation where there'd be insufficient payroll, and that wouldn't help anybody. It might be useful sometime if the committee could look at all the employment taxes, labor laws, and regulations that employers have to contend with, and realize that adding this and other such things really makes it more difficult for them to deal with these things. There's some of the recommendations we have is to reduce the size of employment required, reduce and eliminate the benefit required. The outsource, is to the size of employer, the eligibility and such. But employers will comply with this if you make it mandatory. But we know that when you do that, employers will also make other adjustments. They will reduce employment, reduce or eliminate other benefits such as vacations, retirement, disability, life. They'll outsource production, and they'll relocate operations. We appreciate that the sponsor and others are willing to get together and do this and study and work with employers on this. And we're very supportive of that, but we're opposed to the bill, and we respectfully request an unfavorable vote.
Thank you, Mr. Costello. Any questions for Mr. Costello? Seeing none, thank you for your time today, and we'll move on to Drew Jabin. Is Mr. Jabin here? I don't see him. Nicole Christian.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Vice Chair and committee members. I'm Nicole Christian, President and CEO of the Garrett County Chamber of Commerce, here on behalf of our 600 members in opposition to 375. The Family and Medical Leave Insurance Bill, or FAMLY, is onerous and unnecessary legislation. Although the payments to the Family Fund would be split equally between employers and employees, no matter how you package it, it is still a tax on employers. The current Federal Family and Medical Leave Act creates additional cost to businesses as they have to hire temporary workers and pay overtime to current employees. There are no real cost savings to an employer for an employee being out on family. Family unnecessarily expands FMLA. The current FMLA law is limited to employers with 50 or more employees. Family expands the program to all Maryland employers, including small businesses and nonprofits that have been hit particularly hard by the pandemic. FMLA was created to provide employees job protections if they have to take an extended leave. It wasn't really designed to pay the employee for that leave. Family also expands employee eligibility. To be eligible for FMLA, an employee must work 1,250 hours in the preceding 12-month period, where this bill only requires an employee to work 680 hours. Maryland's program should not require less qualifying hours than the federal program. The legislature should also consider the additional encumbrance on Maryland's Unemployment Insurance Division. The UI office is completely overwhelmed due to the pandemic, and adding the creation and administration of a new program is just going to exacerbate this strain. The state administrative costs and program contributions are exorbitant and prohibitive. Not only is this tax being considered, but huge mandated business expenses are also being deliberated in the form of the Essential Workers Act, which will require hazard pay, financial aid for healthcare, and additional sick leave. In the past 3 years, businesses have been hit with a minimum wage increase, mandated paid sick leave, and the pandemic. It all adds up, and businesses have reached a breaking point. They need help, not more taxes. We respectfully request an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Christian. Any questions for Ms. Christian? Thank you for being here today. I see no questions. Kurt McCauley.
Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee, name is Kurt McCauley. I represent WMDA, who represents service stations, convenience stores, and automotive repair shops in the state of Maryland. We oppose HB 375. because it's not just the cost of the contributions, but it's the cost that you don't see. It's the cost of paying time and a half overtime to other employees to cover that position. It's working 17 weeks and getting 12 weeks leave. That just doesn't seem like the right ratio to me. I'm not about that, but that's pretty good ratio for an employer. The professional costs, the attorneys and HR people, the professional help alone to administer this bill would be very costly also. We have state fines of $1,000, civil suits to go on top of that. The employee, he can do what he wants, and all he does is lose his right for leave for a year. The bill has a lot of problems that just need to be addressed, and we do recognize that it's well intended, and it just won't work in its current form. With that, you have my written testimony. I won't belabor it anymore, and thank you. And we vote with appreciate an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCulley. I see questions for you. We appreciate you taking the time to be here today, and we will now move on to Mike O'Halloran.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and members of the House Economic Matters Committee. For the record, my name is Mike O'Halloran, here on behalf of NFIB Maryland in respectful opposition to House Bill 375, legislation creating a paid family and medical leave insurance program, the funding of which is derived by employer and employee contributions. I'd like to focus my testimony, as so many have, on the cost of such a program. There are certainly technical issues with the bill, which you've also heard about, not least of which is the heavy-handed approach towards enforcement of this new program, which includes a private right of action. But given the economic crisis we find ourselves in and the fact it will take Maryland small businesses years to recover from it, I feel it's best to highlight the steep cost to implement and maintain this program. I'll start with the fact that 1 in 3 small business owners tell us they will be forced to close their doors for good if economic conditions don't improve soon. On top of that, more than half do not anticipate business conditions getting back to normal levels until sometime in 2022. Sales levels are still 50% or less than they were pre-crisis for 1 in 5 small businesses. Acknowledging these realities for our state's job creators hopefully means passing legislation which will cost them more and more, indeed thousands of dollars more each year, should be a non-starter. Small business owners also acknowledge the hardships their employees have faced during this crisis. Trust me when I say they do, because they share the same exact stories. They were the ones that were forced to lay off or furlough employees when they were made to close their doors or reduce their capacity. Small business owners did and continue to do everything they can to help their employees, offering flexible hours, remote working opportunities, and more, but their budgets can only go so far. That is why this one-size-fits-all mandate does not work for Maryland small businesses. An average cost, as we heard from proponents, of $3.63 per employee per week costs a small business owner with 15 workers nearly $3,000 per year. And on the subject of powerful impacts, a preliminary analysis of this bill and its effect on Maryland's workforce shows it will cost nearly 5,000 jobs in 2022. And it's important to note that that analysis is for the first year after enactment, but before benefits can begin being paid out. Those job loss numbers go up dramatically over the course of the analysis, whereby HB 375 would cost nearly 25,000 jobs by 2031. This is not a job creator, unfortunately, and nor does it pave the way for job creation, which I think everyone would agree is paramount after a year that saw tens of thousands of Marylanders lose their job to this pandemic. For these reasons, NFIB opposes HB 375 and respectfully requests an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Halloran. I do not see any questions for you. I have one. Is the analysis that you just discussed included in your written testimony?
It is not. So the analysis that was done was by our research center. We're actually, as you might imagine, with a change in Washington, D.C. and a new Congress, that research center has been worked to the bone doing different analyses, not only on federal legislation, but indeed all states. So we're working on finalizing that, but as soon as it's done, I will make sure that the committee has it.
All right, that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your testimony today. And our last witness, Sarah Price.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and honorable members of the committee. My name is Sarah Price, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Retailers Association. This is not the time to place additional burdens on employers. The fact of the matter is that many retailers, through no fault of their own, were forcefully shut down for almost 3 months last year because of COVID. And even after reopening, their sales have not returned to normal as the pandemic has had additional impacts on overall shopping habits. The combination of less revenue coming in and additional costs for safety measures and PPE, which is hitting the retail industry at the same time as increased sick leave costs, impending minimum wage increases, and potential unemployment insurance increases, has left retailers needing recovery time. As was mentioned by my colleague at the chamber, we have met with the advocates on this bill numerous times over the years and made good faith efforts to put forward recommendations for the bill, but they have never been fully incorporated. The largest point, which was also recommended by the task force several years ago, is that this fund should be paid for by employees. Finally, I would like to point out that of the states, and there are only a few, that collect payroll funds to build an insurance program like this, none have been in effect for long enough yet to show long-term solvency. We truly do not have an accurate picture yet as to what it takes to create a solvent fund with the proposed structure. For these reasons, we would urge an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. Any questions for Ms. Price? Seeing none, thank you very much for your time today, Ms. Price. And colleagues, that concludes the hearings for today. And we will obviously be back again tomorrow for further hearings. I hope everybody has a nice evening, and we'll see you live tomorrow. Not live, I guess. I'm sorry. We'll see you virtually again.